Hello, BookTube. Recently, David Wiley has started a minor little fad here on BookTube of bookshelf essentials, where you look at your shelves and you pick a book or two or three or 100 in my case that really is a linchpin in your collection. You could see yourself getting rid of other things, but not these, for whatever reason. It doesn't have to be because they're the most excellent. It doesn't have to be that at all. It can be just that they hit the right chord with you. And I want to show you too. Today I'm doing a Bookshelf Essentials double header. Once upon a time, it would only have been the first book. This is by Alan Weisman, and it is called The World Without Us. And if you are familiar with any of the documentaries or the History Channel specials or the miniseries or the spin-offs or the rip-offs or whatnot, this is what started them all. And in this book, Alan Weisman engages in Anthropocene snuff fiction. the Anthropocene is a term that was coined just a little while ago to refer to the fact that every aspect of the world's environment is now affected or dictated by humans, by human activity. Humans are everywhere. They do everything, they affect everything, and have been for a long time, long before the Industrial Revolution. Homo sapiens sapiens has been a gigantic game changer of a species on this planet. Probably no other species has ever been the like. It's an open question whether or not you consider that a good or a bad thing. I think it's pretty obvious that Homo sapiens sapiens, our species, is a cancer. It has been horrible for everything else on this planet. Maybe marginally good for each other, but horrible for everything else. Every other species of human was eliminated by Homo sapiens. Most of the world's megafauna that existed when Homo sapiens finally learned to start plotting murder together, organizing, making language that could be used, that was used originally before it was used for any kind of I love yous, to plot how to kill something much bigger than yourself. Most of that megafauna, that gigantic charismatic megafauna, was either extinguished by humans or driven right to the brink of extinction, so that they are tiny vestige populations. And also the environment. The environment was more or less left alone by humans until they discovered the combustible engine, until they discovered fuel, and the Industrial Revolution took off, in which case the amount of carbon in the atmosphere has skyrocketed, pumped there by humans. This is causing the climate to unbalance, as you can see out your window every summer, every winter. You can see it all around you. And that, despite any current prognostications, that is not going to stop. And once it reaches a tipping point, it's not going to matter if it stops or not. That awareness that you can find human-generated plastic at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, that you can find condoms on the upper 100 feet of Mount Everest, that you can find human detritus and trash everywhere, that everywhere that humans are, animals are desperately, other non-human animals are desperately clinging on to some humiliating vestige of what was once their life and being wantonly tortured and abused. And that's to say nothing of the industrial meat market that underpins so much of human society and that causes such immeasurable torture and misery every year, year after year after year after year. Millions of people with senses of humor, bottomless capacity for love, the ability to wake up on the wrong side of the bed, the ability to enjoy their lives, are being warehoused, tortured, and then brutally murdered so that humans can have a $2 burger for lunch and forget about it. When you look at that, when you look at the whole scope of that, some people, some writers are prompted to think what the world would be like if that weren't true. And hence we come back to Anthropocene snuff fiction. I don't know Alan Weisman. I don't know that that's the reason why this book ever happened. But in this book, he imagines a scenario that has crossed the mind of anyone who has ever indulged in Anthropocene snuff fiction. He imagines what would happen if humanity disappeared. If humans disappeared overnight, what would happen to the world? Now, there are 10 billion humans on Earth, so they are not going to disappear overnight, no matter what. Gigantic asteroid that strikes the planet. There are two that backyard astronomers think might be out there. It's almost impossible to spot them if they're in the wrong quadrant of the sky. There's also Apophis, that despite what you hear astronomers so confidently say, is almost certainly going to strike the Earth in 2029. Apophis is not a planet killer, but it is a city killer. And there are two objects that backyard scientists have spotted that they're not sure of. Their data doesn't agree with each other, and it also is not corroborated by anybody else. But those objects are much bigger than Apophis, if they're true, and if they're sneaking up on Earth from the dark side of the sun, from the dark side of our shadow of the sun. There wouldn't be any warning anyway, and the warning wouldn't matter in any case. Even if such a thing were to strike the Earth, something, let's say, 3 times the size of Apophis, it still wouldn't eliminate all humans overnight. It would eliminate the blast radius of that strike, would eliminate lots and lots of people, lots and lots of cities that would be plainly vaporized. But there are 10 billion humans on Earth, and they're everywhere. The real thing that kills a planet when you have a meteoric impact like that is the climate change that follows. Not the kind of climate change that we're dealing with, but actual off the edge of a cliff catastrophic climate change, where millions of tons of dirt and rock and soot are catapulted into the air, into the upper atmosphere. And the stuff that doesn't rain back down as molten fire stays up there and blocks off the sun. So when you think about, for instance, the Chicxulub crater, the asteroid that precipitated the end of the reign of the dinosaurs on this planet, don't think that all the dinosaurs died overnight. They didn't. They lasted for a long time. It was just the climate had changed to something that they could not evolve fast enough to deal with it. That would happen if Apophis or something bigger than Apophis were to strike this planet. That would happen. So humans would still be around. They wouldn't all disappear overnight. And I guarantee you that the last human to die in the climate change that would result from that meteor strike, right before he dies, would throw a plastic wrapper out the window of his car. I guarantee you that would be true. So the opening scenario of Weisman's book here could not happen. But he indulges in it anyway as a kind of imaginative exercise. What would happen? The underlying question in this book being, how quickly would the world recover? Would the world recover? And if so, how quickly would it recover? In what ways? What would that look like? And it's fascinating. There's not a page of this book that isn't fascinating. It is fascinating from front to back. From the bigger things, maybe if you haven't read this book, maybe you never wondered what would happen to highways. What would happen to gigantic skyscrapers? To little things, like, for instance, the common saw, the common bit of folk wisdom about the end of the world is that the cockroaches would survive. But cockroaches are tropical species. The only reason they thrive in houses in the northern part of the world is because they live on artificial heating produced by humans. If those buildings went cold, they would go. They would either migrate or they would all die, except for places where it's naturally warm. But Weisman doesn't give you any climate change here. He's speculating that the world is exactly the same except this species is gone. And it's all endlessly interesting. It's wonderfully done. Just wonderfully done. I loved it, even though there were many ways in which I disagreed with it. I think, for instance, when he looks at human superstructure, he makes calls about what will be around in 10 years, what will still be recognizable in 100 years, what will still be recognizable in 1,000 years. I think he might be a little bit underestimating the permanence of a lot of human superstructure. And also, my biggest complaint with this book is that he assumes that the picture that he creates of this world, you can sort of see it on this cover, wonderful cover design, is that the world would recover from humans and go back to being a healthy place, which it hasn't been since humans arrived. And I don't think that's true. I think humans would, to put it, in a comic kind of way, I think humans would probably take the planet with them. Because there are a huge number of nuclear facilities, both on land and at sea, on war vessels, that require human intervention or they go critical. They melt down. There are a huge number of those facilities. They would, one by one, all go critical. And that would be catastrophic. One of them, maybe, if you've ever been to the Forbidden Zone for Chernobyl, you know that it is thriving. Nature is thriving there. But 100 of those? Some of them 10 miles from each other? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that the world, 150 years after humans disappeared, if they ever magically did, would be an irradiated wasteland. Mostly an irradiated wasteland. I'm pretty sure that's the case. These things have dead man switches. They would erupt without humans. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it would be more self-contained. Maybe the gist of Weissman's book is that the world is a biological organism very much. The Gaia hypothesis is very much behind the back of this book. That the world is an organic process, an organic thing that would heal if this constant cancerous irritant were removed. I don't know whether you'll end up agreeing with this or not, but I go back to this book all the time. As soon as I read it, I knew that it was a bookshelf essential. I just love it. Absolutely love it. But it is part of a double header because another book came out years and years later that is very similar. They really pair well together. And I go back to this one a lot too. This is by Mike Pearl, and it's called The Day It Finally Happens. And you can see on the cover of this one is every possible disaster you could imagine that would happen to humans. So this is the complement to The World Without Us, because The World Without Us doesn't give you the reason why humans aren't around anymore. And this one does. This one, instead of giving you what the world would be like afterwards, there are feints in that direction, but instead of doing that, this gives you all the scenarios, all the doomsday scenarios, and it is so much fun to do. Full-scale nuclear exchange between all the world's nuclear powers, a gigantic asteroid impact, an alien invasion, a plague, that is, of all the items here, there's not going to be an alien invasion, of course, and climate change is happening, but humans will adapt, and they will move, and they will eke along. And full-scale thermonuclear war, well, it wouldn't get everybody. It wouldn't kill all human life, and it probably wouldn't be full-scale. No, I think, if I remember correctly, in this book, Pearl might disagree with me, but the thing that has the chance here is that thing along the finally, a virus. A virus that probably would need a little bit of helping hand from humans, but imagine a gain-of-function, an enhanced virus that was enhanced in a laboratory that was as deadly as Ebola and as communicable as smallpox. Or even if it were a weaponized version of smallpox, no one in the world is naturally immune to smallpox anymore. It's given our communal experience with COVID-19, it's easy to imagine a virus that would be the real thing. That would be the thing that would have the highest chance of taking out humanity when it finally happens. If you think back to COVID-19, yes, there was a lot of panic, and governments overreacted. Definitely, private institutions overreacted. But the reality on the ground of COVID-19 is that if you weren't in a risk group, you weren't going to die. I think the whole point behind a lot of the common sense health measures that were taken in 2020 was to make sure you didn't infect someone who was in a high risk group. If you didn't have serious comorbidities, if you weren't very old, if you weren't already sick, then it was unlikely that you would contract COVID, and if you got it, it was unlikely that you would die of it. Even without serious medical intervention, you would just have the mother of all flus, and then you'd get better. Which is not to say that I'm in the conspiracy theorist camp. Much better to have the world's powers overreact to such a thing than to have them underreact to it. Very much so. If you were in 2020, let's say, an older person with comorbidities, you would have been very grateful that the governments were coming down hard on people to make them wear masks. A mask is so efficient. It's so simple to stop the spread of heavy particles in a clouded environment. It's such a simple thing. And yet there were huge numbers of people in America, once it became a reality in America, there were huge numbers of people who immediately hauled out their "Don't Tread on Me" tags and didn't want to do that. If you were in a vulnerable group, you were very grateful that pressure was brought to bear to make them do that. It makes me curious to know what the next pandemic will be like. You know there'll be one. There are labs all over the world that are doing gain-of-function research on viruses, where you take a virus and you see if you can make it worse. Technically, you are telling yourself, you're telling your superiors, you're maybe telling your soul at night, that you're doing that in order to understand how it works to better prepare for it. But you're still making a monster that is almost certainly going to get out of your control. All it has to be is, a tiny little spot, a tiny little speck, smaller than the eye can see, a droplet on somebody's shoe, a maintenance worker who walks out the door. And then it's they told two friends, and they told two friends, and they told two friends, and then suddenly half the city is sick. What if that infection were something much, much worse. Something that was easy to communicate and that did not have any favored group that would kill anyone. But all the likelihoods in this book are dealt with, and they're dealt with in a very playful way, a very knowledgeable way. Everything from an asteroid attack to massive crop failure, some sort of fungus that goes all over the world, war, and all kinds of war, not just nuclear, even alien war. Wonderfully, wonderfully done. And when I was thinking about it, I thought how well these two things go together. There's the world without us in which something removes humans, and what would happen to the world if that happened, and the day it finally happens, which is all the things that could remove humans. So there's your Bookshelf Essential doubleheader for today. It's a little bit of Anthropocene snuff fiction for you, in case you're ever in the mood. Just the other day, I was on a subway car here in Boston that was crowded. It was one of the first times in years that I have been on a crowded subway car. And there's nothing that will quicker induce you to dreams of Anthropocene snuff fiction than being on a crowded subway car. I was dreaming about everything in the day it finally happens by the time that ride was over. So if you've ever indulged in that, these are two books you definitely want to read. Definitely. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.